Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditsies. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to run. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys, Miss Liz in the house, and that's right. And we have our rescheduled tea time tonight. So it is a Wednesday. Yes, Miss Liz is in the house on a Wednesday, and you are all surprised because I'm usually here Tuesdays and Thursdays. But today I am here with a special guest all the way from the United States, and I guess maybe some of you all recognize once he pops up. So we have Thaao Penghlis in the house, and we're going to serve his tea. And his tea tonight is coming to America and cooking supper for friends. That is the tea we are serving along with The Great Escape. We're going to talk about a project that he's working on to bring to film. So we're going to talk about a lot of incredible things tonight. But before we get started, you guys know how Miss Liz rolls. Get over to all those platforms: Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Lemonade, Clapper, all those good platforms. Give those a like, follow, and subscribe. And if you see the guests on those platforms, give them a follow as well, because that's how we make a difference. We share and support one another. Then jump over to all the podcast apps: Podbean, iHeartRadio, Listen Notes, Deezer, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those ones. But I want you guys all to jump over to babyboomers.org, because if you're looking to be featured on different podcasts, they have over 50 different platforms over there that have podcasts, and Miss Liz has been partnered with them for about 4 years now. So check that out, babyboomers.org, and give them a like, follow, and subscribe as well. So let's get started with disclaimer and then a beautiful intro, and then we're going to get Thaao in here, and we're going to spill some tea and have some fun with all of you guys tonight. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I'm Miss Liz is going live using Streamer. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant me permission to display your streamer.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com, or check out my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if any time you feel this platform is not right for you, and I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where every conversation opens the door to remarkable lives, bold, creative visions, and stories determined to find their way into the world. Today, we are honored to welcome Thaao Penghlis, Emmy-nominated actor, best-selling author, world traveler, adventurer, and master storyteller, known internationally for his unforgettable portrayal of Tony DiMera on Days of Our Lives. Thao's career has spanned decades of television, film, theater, writing, travel, history, and artology. Today, however, we are stepping into an exciting new chapter of his creative journey as we discuss The Great Escape, a powerful story Thaao is actively working to bring to the screen as a film. Transforming a story into cinema requires more than a strong ideal. It takes vision, persistence, collaboration, courage, and a determination to keep moving forward through the long and often unpredictable filmmaking process. Thaao understands the power of visual storytelling through acting, writing, and decades of experience within the entertainment industry. He has learned how a compelling story can move beyond words and become an experience audience can see, hear, and feel. Today, we'll explore the inspiration and story behind The Great Escape, why Thaao believes it belongs on the screen, the journey of developing the project into a film, the challenge of moving from concept to production, the importance of finding the right creative collaboration, how his acting, writing, and travel influence his vision, and what he hopes audience will experience through the finished film. Thaao reminds us that some stories refuse to remain ideals. They push, they persist, and they wait for someone brave enough to carry them from imagination into reality. So grab your favorite cup and join us for a fascinating conversation filled with filmmaking, creativity, perseverance, adventure, and real life tea, truth, experience, and awareness. And let me get Thaao in here. Let's spill some tea. Welcome, Thaao.
I'm just having my great coffee. Well, thank you.
Oh, did I lose you for a second? Just give it 1 second. It's going to click on. Just say hi. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hi.
My hearing aids again are playing a little trick on me. There you are, Thaao. Welcome to the show.
Again, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So, Thaao, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into all of the great stuff. Who were you as a little guy and who are you now?
Well, I grew up in Australia, Greek family. They immigrated from an island in Greece called Kastellorizo. So we kind of were brought up on old values. And we were led to believe that the island that my parents came from was the society of all of Greece, which it wasn't, but that's what we were led to believe. So we had this kind of arrogance growing up, thinking we were much more important than we were. But, you get over that in my business. You walk into a room, they can just cut you to shreds. But, it was a struggle, the youth. I don't particularly recall it being adventurous very much because coming from Australia, very isolated. And so in my dream, and I used to go to the movies a lot as a kid, was to come to America, not to be an actor or be in the industry, but just to come to a country that I felt had this new kind of freedom that I didn't experience. And so I ended up in New York. And, it was, you think, is your path already foretold, or is it all by accident what happens? Is the success already down the road, or is it something you have to create and persevere with to get there? But I think New York was really an eye-opener for me because firstly, I've never had that kind of freedom where I didn't have to call my mother and say I'm fine, Greek boys and mothers. And so I had this new independence. And so it was a big struggle, but I worked at the UN for a year because I was an immigration official growing up in Australia in my youth. And then I met a director. I met some archaeological people who dealt in ancient Chinese art and Egyptian art, and that made me fascinated with that subject as well. So basically, my 20s was about collecting all the evidence to become who I was becoming. And in the end, I'm glad all those seeds planted in my 20s resulted in blossoming for me later on. And so what I learned in those days, or what I was beginning to learn, was the way I could apply myself later. And the acting was really by accident. It wasn't something I thought I could do because I wasn't very good at it, actually. I was rather stiff. I had to loosen up. I had to go to not just acting classes, but dancing classes and speech classes because I had this strange accent. But listen, it all works out. You polish yourself in the best way you can, and hopefully someone sees it and embraces it. And that's what happened.
Absolutely. Well, Thaao, we have some questions that are coming in, so I'd like to get those out to you. The The first one that came in is from Polar Bear. What first sparked your passion for history and ancient civilization?
Well, that was early on when I was 12 years old, or maybe 11, and we went to the museum to see a mummy of a lost pharaoh, and it was on exhibit in the Sydney Museum. And I remember it was in a casket, and there was a rope around. All I can remember were the fingernails and the hair and this terrible hook nose. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. And so when everybody left for going back to school, I climbed over, opened the casket and touched it, because I felt that in order to sense the reality of this piece, I had to touch it. I've been like that all my life anyway. But that's what gave me the intrigue of ancient art. And then, of course, studying in New York, that also enhanced it. But then all the journeys I've taken, I mean, I've been to Egypt 14 times, and I've been to the Middle East many times, to Greece over 25 times, same with Italy. There's just something about being entranced by things that were well done and have remained as a part of a history that wasn't part of our landscape at the time. And so I always liked exploring, and I have found things in the earth when I've gone on expeditions. And for me, it's to find something in the earth that hasn't been touched in 2,000, 3,000 years is exciting for me. And so, you make your own story. It's like you say, show me a column and I'll tell you a story.
Well, we have another question for you from Dixon Road, and it's, did you always know storytelling would become such an important part of your life?
No, because I was a very shy kid. We weren't allowed to demonstrate very much when we were kids. I was a very good runner. That was the kind of freedom I had to sort of win something. I read a lot of history. I was very good at school at history. But, when I met my boss in New York, Robert Ellsworth, he was the leading connoisseur in Chinese art. That was another area of history that I branched out in. And I think in many ways, we all have stories to tell. It depends on how you tell them. You can always tell at a table, at dinner, when you're telling a story, and those who are listening and those who want to interrupt, because you're dominating the conversation and they want to put in their efforts in. But I listened a lot when I was young. And by listening, I learned about how people said things, told things, how they explored things, the language, the presence of the person. I mean, how do you enhance your presence? And I think it's very much being in the present. And I think a lot of people aren't. You can see that the distractions that we have in today's life. And so I found myself going up on a stage, and then one day when I went home doing from Days Our Lives, that was very successful, and I was able to go home as a celebrity actor, whatever it was. I was asked to speak at the archaeological uh, museum about Greece in Sydney, and they were raising money for it. And I remember I got up on stage. I don't quite remember what I said in that time, but I remember someone said, you should be a speech person. And I thought, well, that was kind of silly. I didn't understand it then. But it wasn't until I did a play in Cape May 10 years ago. And I had traveled so much that I found that people wanted to hear those stories about things that were dangerous, things that were adventurous, things that were poignant in your life, and so I after on the Monday night where we were dark, I brought in a crowd of people, mainly Republicans, and talked about the journeys, and I found that people loved to hear stories about places they would either not be able to go to or would enhance their lives if they did go. And so from there, I got into doing the one-man show in Los Angeles. Here in Beverly Hills, I did a one-man show. And then I did my book, Places, which was all about the journeys I took in my life. And so telling stories, I think it's in my genes, because when you look at the Odyssey now, that was when they wrote that story. Well, that was in the 8th century BC, so they didn't have any writing skills in those days. So it was the illiterate age. And so it wasn't until the 6th century BC that people started to write down. And so these bards would go to places where they would and play an instrument, and they would tell the story. And we've been telling stories, fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, been telling stories to children, teachers. It's just a normal thing, and it's a technique, and it's how you tell the story. That's very important. You don't want to bore an audience, and you want to make it intriguing, keep them wanting more.
Absolutely. I believe that storytelling is the new future of making a difference in the world, because
Yeah.
there's so many different types and styles of storytelling.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they're all different languages, so each language has its own passions. I mean, saying a story in Chinese would have a different kind of story than somebody from a Latin country or from the Southern European. There'd be more passion. The Brits, I mean, you see why the British actors are so good at Shakespeare. They understand the language. They understand the pace of the language. Um, I think it's very important. I think. And how to develop it. I think it should be a course that people learn a story and go up to an audience and tell that story and be graded on that, on how they tell it. And it also must have some humor. You can't just be stiff up there and tell them, you must tell them how you fell over, in the most inopportune time. But yeah, I mean, I've had my funny stories too, and I've had my very serious stories. But storytelling is is about how to embrace an audience and keep them interested.
Absolutely. And Thaao, I want to get into some of your books. So I'm going to pull them up on the screen. I know that you've written a couple of books. So I'm going to bring up the first one, and it's called Places. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Places? I'm just going to bring it up, and then you can tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the one-man show I did in Beverly Hills Theater, it was funny. It was standing room only. And I remember I thought, wow. And I opened it up by reciting the poem of Ithaca that was written by a poet, a Greek poet from Egypt. And I remember that when I met Jacqueline Kennedy, and I spent an hour with her. And I remember that when she died, she asked that that poem be read at her funeral. And so this poet called Cavafy wrote it in 1911. So I opened it up with that because it is the journey of life. It's about not hurrying the journey, but taking your time so you can bring about the wisdom that is part of the experiences we have. And so that when you're old and you anchor at an island, and you would have understood what your life was all about and why you were here. And then you pass on. I mean, I think Mrs. Obama wrote the book Becoming, and I think that's what we are in life. It's about becoming, and one day you wake up and you get to my age, and then you realize you've become, and this is it. And so in the book Places, I wrote about all those stories and all those journeys I took, even the story of how my parents died, both of them within 4 days of each other, while I was doing Days of Our Lives, and how that was the most unbelievable experience that I ever had, to lose them both that quickly, and then to think that the dream I had was really for them, and then when they died, the dream was kind of over, and then I had to recreate the dream. And so Places is all about those experiences that led up to my journey up till 10 years ago. And so a lot of people read it on a holiday because it takes you into places, and how I found and explored those places, and also the dangers that I experienced in some of these Middle Eastern countries.
Well, we have a question here from Tools. Which country has inspired you the most during your travels?
I think the two countries, Greece because it's my heritage, and because I love the language and the history. I mean, it's just amazing how much it it contributed to the world that we play in today. And the Egyptians, because there's something very mysterious about Egyptians. There's that, even their sculptures, the way their afterlife beliefs. I think, Egypt, I've been 14 times, and so I'm going back in April because I want to see the new museum. It's been delayed a number of times, but because COVID and also because of wars, but doesn't matter how many times I've been, I can look at those, the Valley of the Kings, and be amongst the Egyptians and go on a felucca along the Nile and listen to the minarets calling to prayer and all those sounds and everything that makes the atmosphere of a country and its identity. I find that to be really fascinating because you leave your identity in many ways behind. And then when you enter a new country with new things to learn,
Yep.
it expands your own foundation, because when you come back, something about you will have changed. And so I feel that's why journeying, I think, is the best education I ever had.
Well, we have another question for you, Thaao. It's from Brandon this time. Which came first, your love for acting or your love for history?
My love for history. I've always been intrigued. People said to me, why do you want to be an actor? And I said, oh, because I want to travel and see all these incredible places in the world. And they said, well, actors don't make money. Actors, if you look at the majority of them there, well, I've never had to have another job except be an actor. I started in my 20s and here I am, and I'm still discovering. And it's never ending, I just wish there was more years ahead of me than there are. It's so suddenly when you see so many of your friends go, and then you realize, do you catch up or have you done enough? But the journeying has always dominated my life, because even though I go to an act and do whatever, when that's over, it's over. But the journeys, oh my God, they're memories. They're the things that you come home and talk about and write about. I mean, who wants to hear about your acting, that you had a moment, that you...
Well, a lot of people like to hear about the acting. I like hearing about the history because I'm a big history nerd. So I like to know about the history. So let's talk about The Great Escape, Thaao, because I'm going to bring that up on the screen so people can see what we're talking about tonight. Let me just get it up there. Tell us a little bit how that came about.
Well, in 2010, I took a journey to Egypt because I read that there are all these sacred areas where the Holy Family had hidden from Herod when they escaped in around 4 BC, and with their child, the Christ, and how they spent over 4 years hiding from one place to another. So I went and explored those areas. I took a guide with me, and we stopped for a few days over different places, and it was really fascinating to think, you're in their space, and a lot of them caves or under schools or under churches. Even in ancient Cairo, in an area called Babylon, there's the St. George's Church, and it sits upon an ancient Roman fortress, but it's round. So St. George's is round, but underneath, when I walked into the church one day, and the priest looked at me and said, "Are you Greek?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Come here, I want to show you something." I don't know why, but he lifted this grate and took me all the way down this spiral staircase to the bottom. And right there was the well where the Holy Family drank from, the space where they hid for 3 months. And there I was sitting in it. Well, we all have imaginations, and we all can just walk into a place and think, okay, sorry, let's leave. Or you can stay there and feel something and explore something and wonder what it was like, over 2,000 years ago. And so out of that journey came the idea of The Great Escape. It hadn't been told. And I thought, well, I wonder why the story hasn't been told. And when you go to because, if we didn't have the Holy Family escaping into Egypt from Herod, then Christianity would have died in the cradle. So
Yeah.
they brought Christianity to Egypt, and that became the Coptic Church. And it's a wonderful, I love their uniform. And I think I've been to the majority of uh, places that deal with monasteries and churches in the Middle East and in Greece. But in Egypt, I went to St. Catherine's Monastery. I climbed the mountain of Mount Moses, and then I came down, and that became part of the excitement of what life is capable of giving you if you're willing to explore and go to these lands that a lot of people thought were dangerous. But so when I came home one day, that was in 2010, and I thought, oh, that's a good story. So I began to write it. And then I thought, when I wrote the story in the book Places, I then thought, well, that could be an interesting podcast. And because I did the Schliemann podcast of Discovering Troy, which I think now is very valid because of the Odyssey. But I went through 60,000 documents of Schliemann, who discovered Troy and also uncovered Mycenae. And so I went and walked through those areas, not once or twice, but many times, because depending on how I felt, when I landed there, each time was different. The tombs and sitting in the tombs, depending on how developed I was in my life. And so I decided to do this podcast after I did the Schliemann podcast. And you don't know what's going to come out. And so I took part one, which was the journey of getting there. And then 2 and 3 were the actual history that I discovered about how the wise men, how they came from a place in northern Persia, ended up and took this route of 750 miles to 1,000 miles, crossing all the different deserts and getting to Judea and discovering the Holy Family and what they gave with the gifts, as we know. But most of the times we just see that as postcards. What I
Yeah.
discovered, who were the wise men? Who were they? You know, what was their contribution? And where did they finally end up? And their story is fascinating. Where their bones are ended up today, where they can be seen. And you know, in different countries, you know, they're looked upon as saints, and because of what they did for the Holy Family. So my story began to expand, and then one day I opened a book on the journey of the Holy Family and found out there was a witch involved. And then I investigated the witch. So just a couple of weeks ago, I wrote um, a story about the Holy Family coming across this witch and what she was trying to do. It's a fascinating story. And so I recorded it, and it's going to be released in the podcast of The Great Escape in the next week or so. So it's an addition to what I've already put there. And that is also in my screenplay. And so, um, you know, it's a wonderful thing about life. You know, you think you've finished, and then someone says, well, what about this? And then suddenly another idea comes. And so the story that was very simple but beautiful became much larger and more complicated because of the characters involved. Who contributed to that passage that the Holy Family took, and how they survived? Why were they able to survive when Herod's soldiers, his secret police, were after them for 4 years? How did they? So it's about that story, and it's an adventure in a sense, um, and that's what I did. And so I've named my screenplay "The Journey of the Innocents."
Oh,
So it's gone from The Great Escape, because there's a movie called The Great Escape from the 70s, which was a war film. And I didn't want people to think this is what it was. This is, The Great Escape is now becoming, it really is about the journey that certain innocents took and what transpired.
so by changing the title of it, the screenplay, do you feel that that's going to reach a different audience?
Well, you know, and unless you finish something, you know, it was good when I was writing it as the escape. But now that it's been broadened and much bigger, uh, what would you call it? The encompassing story is so much bigger now that when you see what happens in life and when people and how people try to sabotage innocence, because of their criminality, their lack of love or their lack of caring.
Yeah,
It always surprises me, the choices people take.
absolutely. That amazes me too.
And when we see it even in today's government, and you see the greed. You think 2,000 years later, we talked about the greed of the times, of the Romans, the Herods of the world, the Greeks, and then you look at it today and you're thinking, you're not going anywhere with all of this.
Yeah.
What is this? There has to be a tremendous insecurity within that soul of that person that they have to fill it up with such things as money, in those days gold or whatever, and think that it makes you more important or powerful or stronger. Superficially it might, but when you make that passage, you don't even take your underwear with you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's empty. It's an
You
empty
you
place.
you come empty and you leave empty.
Yeah. So for me, it's very important what I take with me. And if this was the last project I ever did, I'd be very happy. Although I do have another one. I read something for Days of Our Lives, and my producer really loved the idea, and then he got fired. So I've got this story, and I thought I can make this into a thriller, into a movie. So I've got that on hand. But right now, I'm dealing with a spiritual subject that makes me feel good when I read through it, and knowing that even Mel Gibson next year is going to be releasing two movies on the resurrection, part one and part two, which will be, I think, March and May. And then you have Ulysses, the Odyssey, and you see the size of that. So we're looking back at movies, I think, basically, which we used to love when growing up, because people listen. Ben-Hur to me is still Ben-Hur. I mean, I
Yes.
still think of those movies that were done in the 50s, late 50s, rather than all this shallow crap that we see
Right?
on the screen. I mean, really, I'm so sorry for a lot of the youth, because we were brought up where things remained with
Yeah.
us because of their values. Today, it's all just noise. And I mean, I've got friends who go to the movies 2 or 3 times a week, and I say, well, what are you seeing? There's not that many good movies coming out. And it's
No.
all shallow. It's all noise, shallow, and it doesn't take us anywhere. It's all vacuous. And so that's the difference between filmmakers that I grew up with the filmmakers of today, because they think, an audience of today can't concentrate too much because you have to keep distracting them.
Yeah.
And, I remember a young student said, oh, what do you believe in? What moved you? I said, let's watch Lawrence of Arabia. Let's watch that movie and see the scope of that movie. And halfway through, he was from Days of Our Lives, this actor. And I said, what do you think? He says, it's so slow.
But it was a simple storytelling feeling back then. It really made a difference. It took the time for us to understand the storyline.
Character, it had character, and it had depth, and you came out talking about it. The reason why the Odyssey is so popular is people are coming out talking about it. I mean, these movies, other movies you see, you don't come out talking about them. You say, oh, that was great. We had a good time. What are we having to eat? But I saw people arguing about the Odyssey and what all the different spots that Ulysses had to anchor in order. I mean, it's like I said, the Ithaca poem. It's about, where do you land in the end? But in between the end and the beginnings, there are all these journeys, and what do those journeys mean? And the thing about the Odyssey is that each journey had a meaning that was very personal, about a man trying to understand. There were distractions, as we know, but trying to understand where he came from and where he was going and what he was missing in his life. So, um, that's great. I think, as much as I wasn't crazy about the movie, um, being Greek, someone argued with me and they said, yes, but it's universal. And I said, it's still a Greek story. It has remained a Greek story since the ancient world. That's why it has been able to come to the present, because it had this kind of substance. Yes, it has meaning for everybody. It's still being told by Greeks. And so when I saw the casting, I was so disappointed, because I don't care who you are, Anglos in the world do not demonstrate emotion the same way a Latin or a
Yeah.
Southern European would. The passion is different. That's why we have all the different types of human beings that we have in this world, which makes the world great, because we have all these places to assimilate in and understand. But when you're telling a story, as we said in the beginning, then it's very important that you're having the visuals are very important, and that's why,
Absolutely.
I mean, I like Matt Damon. I think he's a wonderful actor. He had, Ulysses was a very cunning, sly character. He was not likable, you know. Matt
Well, kind
Damon,
of like your character on Days of Our Lives, right?
yes, he's diabolical, It's like, thanks for reminding me. Yes, like my character Days of My Life. I'm going, it depends on the day and which I'm performing. And I thought, I wonder if I shall be mean today, or shall I just cover it up in some way? But um, yeah, it was. I think that's why the character lasted for so long, because he was diabolical, and because he could be charming, and you didn't know where he was coming from. So that led you to be interested. You
Yeah.
can't put everything on the table and say, this is dinner. It's got to have some kind of formality where people have to be curious about you. Once the curiosity is gone, it's over.
Right? And that's how
Right.
you can die and come back and die and come back.
Yeah, isn't that funny? I was the first actor in daytime to play a double character, and I was the first one to have that death situation and come back 7 times, and the audience still bought it.
You're like a
Oh,
cat, got 9 lives.
and you know why how I created that idea was because the head writer heard that I thought his scripts were not very good, and some actor, which I won't name, went and stabbed me in the back and said that I thought his scripts were. So he got so upset he's going to kill me. And so I had to play a character of where, in those days, we're not, well, even these days, we don't smoke. But I thought, telling the story of this character and what he was setting up, I took out a cigarette. And by putting that cigarette and telling the story, the monologue I had, that when they killed me off, my producer called me a year later. He said, "You know what you did? You created a character that when the audience saw him, said, that can't be him. He doesn't smoke." And that led to bringing me back. And each time and that was 7 times from that moment, I was brought back. Not that I liked dying all those times. It just wasn't fun at all. But it's what it was.
Well, you're almost like a cat. You have 9 lives.
Yes, I still have another two.
Another 2.
Except I'll tell you, be honest with you, if they ever brought me to die again, I wouldn't do it.
That's it. You've had enough.
I've had enough of that reality or non-reality. I mean, you send me upstairs for a while. Now they send me on a boat on a cruise because my wife likes to take cruises, and I'm going. She hasn't even been out of America, and she likes to go Europe and cruise and everything. And I said, why don't you do what you did to Susan Hayes for a while? You sent her up the stairs and she didn't come down for a while. It's that kind of simplicity. It doesn't have to be so complicated. Otherwise, you'd come out shallow. Oh, just came back from another journey. It was just magnificent. We took this cruise. My wife went and bought all this jewelry. And I'm going, oh, God, there's no substance in this. That's the way it is. You know.
Well, Thaao, I want to talk about another book you have, and we have a question about that book. Is what inspired you to write Seducing Celebrities One Meal at a Time?
Well, I do. One of the things I do enjoy is bringing people in my home and cook. Variation of things. I make really good soups as an opening course, but my cooking is diverse. But I've never had anybody leave my house and had a bad tummy or something. People like my food. It's what they like to do. You can tell because people sit around a table and they want to talk. They don't want to leave the table after they've finished dinner. It still becomes part of the festivities. And so, um, I met a lot of people and celebrities in my life and entertained them. Doris Roberts used to come every week and sit at a particular chair and just sit like a dowager and want to be served. And she enjoyed the food a lot. And or I'll go out on my deck here and I bring food out there, and that's always nice in the summer days or in autumn. But I think food is kind of a seduction. If you really like food and you like to cook for people, because in many ways it's part of you that you give to people who want to enjoy your space and your conversations in your home. Um, and so that's why I wrote this book. I got a call from a publisher and he says, have you ever thought about doing a cookbook? And I started to think about it, and I thought, he says, well, what does food mean to you? And I said, well, it's really about seduction. It's the food of the gods. It's what, I kind of understand how people always give themselves so little when it comes to eating badly. What they choose, and I think, why don't you celebrate more? When you come
Yeah.
home and you've had a good day's work or even a bad day, celebrate your life, celebrate with people you love. And so even when I go home to Australia, I'm always in the kitchen because I enjoy it. It's not because I have to. Like this Saturday, I'm supposed to have 7 people for dinner. Although I'm not quite sure, part of me is going, oh, that's a lot of work. So, but I enjoy watching people making sounds when they're eating and taking in the tastes of things they haven't had before.
Like describe a lemon. If you could describe a lemon right now, Thaao, how would you describe it?
Well, a lemon has a certain aroma to it. If you grate it, its oils bring a certain aroma. If you cut it and you taste it, it's kind of almost a sour taste. But at the same time, if you understand that a lemon also cleanses the palate and also cleanses your body, your skin, it's a very kind of sensual fruit when you think about it. It's like a fig to me. Fig is the same. It's a very sensual fruit because when you open it and put your mouth to it, it's all these juices. So that's the thing I love about food. It's just not, oh, well, that's a lemon. People say, oh, that's just a lemon, or that's a piece of whatever. And you're going, no, I'd go beyond that. Or make get into something else if it looks so plain. It's like the cactus fruit.
Yeah.
The cactus fruit, to me, when you have it cold and they've taken all the thorns out of it and you cut it up and you take that skin off, and what comes out of it is this red fruit. It has the most wonderful taste, sweetness, that when you put it to your mouth, it's like, it makes your mouth water. So that's to me. But to me, because I grew up as a Greek, lemons were always on the table. We put lemons on everything, especially seafood, even meats. We put a lot of lemon. On lamb, we use a lot of lemon. Things that have a different kind of aroma, or they break down things and bring out the juices.
Well, it's kind of like storytelling, right? Using the foods.
Yes. That's why when I say to somebody, why are you so unkind to yourself? They said, what? I said, well, look what you're eating. I remember I went to a big celebrity's house one day, and they wanted to meet me for something. And they asked me for dinner. And what came out of that refrigerator was kookaroo from the day before, and they heated it in the microwave and thought they could serve it to me. That really told me who they were. And I went, wow, you think so little of yourself that you would also think so little of me that you would even have the audacity to serve that dried up chicken from the night before, you know. So to me, it's always a celebration. It's a thing that we're blessed with. I mean, we just take it for granted. We go into markets and everything. Imagine if there was nothing there, and there was like we had during COVID and everything, and there was nothing. I mean, people ran to get what they could. There was a desperation, you know. Even watermelon, you know, the different fruits, you know, that to me add a texture. They create atmosphere on the table, you know. So yeah, food's very important, and it's to me it's like religion. It should be appreciated, believed in, and embraced, and also have consistency with yourself, rather than the only time you reach for it is when you're either hungry or you're desperate, or because somebody's doing something and you need to pray or something. But if it's consistent, you know, if it's a ritual, then to me it builds character.
Yeah. I think that's what's missing in today's society is characters. You know, we're so followers or in a trend that we want to be like everybody else that we forgot who we are as an individual.
Well, you know, you can even look at the way, you know, in our governments. I mean, I love the way Canada stood up for itself, which it should. It's a beautiful country. I love Canada because it's also the country I went and got my immigration papers to be able to come back in the United States, you know. So, and I've worked up there in Vancouver, but I just love the way it stood up. Your president stood up, and you look at all these men who are just hiding behind another person and not and losing their individuality. You know, it's really sad that people. I thought, what happened to you guys? What happened to those great heroes of American history? You know.
I think we need more storytelling to come to life so we can find our individuality again.
Yes. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I wish we could have more storytellers, but we need that in the filmmakers. You know. That's why those movies that keep coming out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you're saying, well, there's nothing new here. It's just, you know, you just turned the page and it's a different picture, but it's the same thing. There's so many great stories. So that's why with my story, I'm really excited about it because of the way it's developing, because I really believe the way this story is being told, and I have a partner now in it. She used to be married to my producer from Mission Impossible when I did that in Australia, the series. And she read the screenplay. She thought it was really wonderful. And then she started editing some things, and then she joined me. And now we've got this. So I'm waiting for her report today because I worked a lot over the weekend. So, you know, this is what it's about, isn't it? It's about bringing new stories, stories that haven't been told, so that people come in with new eyes and leave
Yeah,
theater with conversations and thought and curiosity about life, and it doesn't just end with the same replica, you know.
absolutely. Well, we have some more questions that are coming in. I'd like to get them out.
Yeah.
Rick, how has traveling changed the way you see people and cultures?
Oh, tremendously. See, because I was an immigration official when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, I looked after Southern Europeans, and the woman who was working with me didn't like Southern Europeans. She thought they were wogs. And I thought, this woman doesn't belong in this at this table. So I reported her. I said, why would we have somebody who categorizes other societies, other religions, other countries, other cultures, and put them in some kind of a frame? And I think in many ways that kind of made me realize that it was a great education to meet that many different cultures and then to travel and be part of them, even going to Morocco. And even though it wasn't always a pleasant journey there because it was dangerous at the time, I still found it fascinating, going through the souk or going along the Atlas Mountains and going to fairs that reminded me of Europe. And then I said, where are the ruins? So he took me to a Volubilis, and then I ended up in Casablanca, and that was a hellhole. You always think about Casablanca as a cultural thing because of the movie. Well, it's nothing like it, and I didn't like what happened to me there. They tried to get me into trouble. But, for me, I love every culture, I just think, I don't look at a culture and say, ooh, I don't like that culture. I don't like what their food or their tastes or the people themselves. No, I always think whoever's coming to cross your path has a reason and what the discussion is and what do you learn from that. But if you point at something and you put a label on it, that's your experience.
Yeah.
You don't go any further than that. It becomes locked in a frame. And you have to watch that because we do that a lot. I mean, they're doing that, I was looking at Michigan and about and Elsaid who won last night. And he even said it because of his name. They're all going to say, well, he's an Egyptian. It's like Trump says about Hussein, Obama, using the whole name because in some way it makes it look foreign. When we're all foreign,
Yeah.
if you want to look at it, our heritage came from somewhere, but this is where we landed. And so, yeah, I think learning about other cultures is the best education you can have, and it opens yourself up to who you are and what you're not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have another question here from Paula, and it's, was there one archaeological site that completely changed your perspective on history?
God, Troy.
Oh.
I think I went to Mycenae first, where Agamemnon began the Trojan War and got Ulysses and all the different states of Greece at the time to join at a place called Avli in the northern part of Greece. And it's where they couldn't set sail for Troy. And one of the priests came and said to Agamemnon, you have to sacrifice someone. And he ended up sacrificing his daughter, Iphigenia. And what happened to Clytemnestra, his wife, who never forgave him. And when they went and the winds changed, they went to that along for that war for 10 years. When I arrived in Troy, and Schliemann had uncovered it in the 1860s. So when I was sitting at the edge of it and looking out where the war took place, which is what they call the Troad, and I'm sitting there at the edge of these ruins, and I went, oh my God, I can just, in my mind, I could hear the war taking place between the Greeks and the Romans, and the screams and the cries and the fires that were going on. And I'm sitting there with a glass of champagne, actually, in celebration of being there at this historic, because I'd gone through 60,000 pages of Schliemann's discoveries. And it was absolutely amazing. And to sit there and to be able to watch it. And someone said, well, I've been to Troy, it's just rocks and ruins. And I said, you have no imagination. When you go to Troy and you look at it, you imagine what it must have been like. And I could hear the music. I mean, it was just and I went there 3 times. So I've been there in the winter when it was pouring with rain, and I've been in the summer where there were a lot of mosquitoes. But yeah, that was one of the, that was one also where I found in a tomb in ancient Egypt, 2340 BC, I found in the sands an ancient mummified cloth, and inside was the jackal's jaw. And next to it was all this magnificent jewelry that someone was going to steal or whatever and covered up with the sand. And I was the first one to go in there when they found it because my guide was very prominent. And he said to me, how would you like to go? 2340 BC, that's over 4,000 years. And when I walked into it, I was the first person to go in there after all those years. And so that to me also made me feel that what discovery does to you, that you are the first to touch something after all those years. And what is the story?
So do you like to touch stuff?
Terrible that way. If I don't touch it, it's not alive or it's not real. I got to touch it. You know what I mean? And that's why I like cooking, because I can mix things with my hands or put things together. Yeah, absolutely. It's being present with the piece.
Absolutely. You know, I could see you being a toucher. You know.
Yes, and it's not, I don't do it in a way that people go, oh my God, what's he doing? No, I do it because it's something very personal for me. It's not for anybody else. It's what I take away from it and what I do with it.
Yeah, but you also feel the energy, right?
Oh, well, some, and others you go, oh my God, I don't want to go there.
Don't touch that
I mean,
again.
there are some things that don't always have the best energies, and you have to be, if you're sensitive enough and smart enough not to attack something or go into it right away, but take your time discovering it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know what I
I
like
could see
about
you
this
being a
interview?
toucher, an explainer, storyteller. That's how you became Tony DeMera for so long.
Yes, well, you had an appetite, to say the least.
Right?
Uh, yeah, dance became part of it, clothing became part of it, attitude became part of it. And I tell you, having this interview with you, you have no idea what we're going to talk about, except what are the questions people ask.
Yep.
And out of that comes a conversation and an interview. And I can't tell you, there are some people, I said to them, have you read this? They're asking me questions. No, I haven't had the time. I said, well, why don't you take a read of it so we can have something to talk about? And so
Absolutely.
it makes a much more interesting interview. So I appreciate all the questions that the audience is asking. I mean, I don't know what I know until someone asks me.
Right? Then that's why we do questions. We have one question here from Marianne. It's, where do you think your curiosity and desire to experience new cultures came from? Any certain experiences in your life, maybe?
I think I started early in my life being really involved with Greek culture, the Greek cooking, the Greek rituals, Greek Easter, Greek Christmas, the respect you had for your elders. All that developed character and curiosity because they didn't tell you everything. And as you got older, you wanted to know more. Just like when your parents left, we should ask them other questions. But they weren't demonstrative that way. So I think in many ways was watching my grandmother crochet, was watching my grandfather make sardines in cans with salt and bricks and salt and bricks. Olives the same way, all done from scratch. My grandmother making candles for the church by dipping the wick into the wax and the perfume that came from it. The toast, the cinnamon toast in the morning, when you came down, you could smell. All those things were part of why I became and who I like as an individual. I like what I've become because I took the time to discover,
Yeah.
and people were interested and inspired by some of these stories. Um, it's we are blessed in many ways if we look for the opportunities in life rather than thinking something is owed to you.
Absolutely.
It's about finding out and discovering and adding to that as you go along, and sharing. Sharing's very important. Giving's very important. You take your time and you give when somebody needs something. You don't talk to somebody who's going through a bad time and talk about your success. You sympathize. You have to be there present with that person. So there are many ways of discovering, and I think monasteries did that for me because I took the time to sit in churches and look at monks who would sit and pray 24 hours a day. And one monk saying to me at Meteora in Greece, in the monasteries there up in the high rocks, which are just phenomenal. And I said to him, God, it must be hard living here by yourself, based every day, and all you do, basically, your food is simple and your life is simple. And he says, oh no, we have an extraordinary life. You're the one who has the difficult life because you've got to find enlightenment in chaos. And I thought about that and I went, oh my God. So I remember I had to host a Greek ball a couple of years ago, and I said that to the audience. And I have to tell you, it's like every knife and fork of that thing went down, and people just realized that they're living in chaos and wonder why their lives could be as miserable as a lot of them are, because they're not listening. They're busy eating and busy making noise. But to put the knife and fork down and just listen, because there's something of value being said, you pass that on.
Yeah. Well, that's what my Oma passed on to me was the T, Thaao, was take time to pause, reflect, recharge, and release, right?
Yeah.
Don't just drink the cup of tea.
No,
Enjoy the cup of tea.
it's a ritual. I mean, it's 4 o'clock and I had my Greek coffee. It's part of the ritual. It does something for me. I know it's good for me because it cleans out arteries, but at the same time, it's ceremony. It reminds me of my grandma, my grandfather, my mother, my father, my sisters, my brother. We all had the Greek coffee. And so when I do it, it's part of that platform that I've carried through into the present. And yeah, it's that's why we have rituals. I mean, it's very important. That's why we go to church and light a candle. They're rituals.
Absolutely.
They have meaning behind them because you are centered. At that moment when you light the candle, you're centered because you're praying for something specifically, person, thing, something you need, something you've lost.
So, Thaao, what final message would you like to leave everybody with tonight?
Oh, I thought I left a few messages today. uh, well, listen, I'm in, I've turned 80 and, I look at the way I've lived and I have no resentment about any of it. I made choices, some I wish I'd made better, but that's all part of growing but as long as you keep evolving, as long as change is for the better and not because you don't have anything better to do, I think it's very important that you pay attention to what the journey of your life is about. And if you look up the poem of Ithaca, Ithaka, it's an island in Greece. And that poem, the one that Jacqueline Kennedy had at a funeral, it's recited by Sean Connery. I went to the house of Cavafy in Alexandria. I went there a number of times, actually. I've even sat in his desk where he wrote the poem. And they asked me if I would record and bring it to them, which I'm going to do. Um, it just is about the journey of life, that you enjoy the journey all the way and the obstacles that come up, not to be afraid of them, but to see them face on as to what their meaning is. Because when you're afraid, it's because you don't think you've developed enough to be able to face it. I think we're much stronger than we give ourselves credit for. Heroism is very important. This is why our myths have lasted, because they were about heroes who made a difference. So I think it's very important to take the journey of life so that as you get older, it says, when you visit ancient cities like Egypt and you buy perfumes and ebony and ivory and you take in these beautiful things and take time with them, not to race the journey, to know that each decade in your life has different meaning and growth. And so, your teenage years, that's why they're so tough to work with, because teenagers think they know everything but know nothing because they haven't planted their seeds yet. In your 20s, you plant the seeds. In the 30s, you see those seeds begin to grow. And then in your 40s, you're standing on that foundation. And then it goes on and on and on. And then Your 60s are really about you're standing on the platform. This is who you are. So if I was going to say anything is have a look at the journey you're taking and be clear about where it is you're going. And in the meantime, be kind. Embrace others, because down the road, you're going to need kindness and you're going to need to be embraced at times where you haven't quite worked something out. So I think, kindness is not expensive. And I think that's very important for all of us. That's why I can't stand this president with the way he ridicules people. It's just just wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, Obama, when he spoke, he always praised and said things with quality.
Yeah.
And, you don't make fun of people when you yourself are a joke. You just don't. You're an example. You're supposed to set, it's why we look up at priests, because they're an example. And then, like our senators, and when they fall, and they do fall, that's why people become disappointed. So, best person to trust in your life is yourself. Be an example.
Well, thank you so much, Thaao, for sitting and having tea with me and listening to my audience and all the audience coming in. I'm just going to do a quick recap of what tonight's tea time is, and I'll be back tomorrow for 2 more tea times, and we'll do this all over again. So I'm just going to do a recap. Don't leave. I will be right back. What a fascinating and inspiring conversation we have shared tonight. Thaao, thank you for bringing your wisdom, experience, passion, and creative determination to the tea time table. Tonight's conversation reminded us that creating a film is not simply about standing in front of a camera. It begins long before production. It begins with a story strong enough to demand attention, a vision clear enough to guide others, and the persistence required to continue when the road becomes complicated. Through your work to bring the great escape to film, you have shown us that storytelling is both an art and an act of endurance. We've explored the inspiration behind the project, the process of developing it, and the screen, the importance of collaboration, the importance and the courage it takes to protect a creative vision while inviting others to help bring it to life. One of tonight's greatest takeaways is this: a powerful story does not become a film through imagination alone. It becomes real through commitment, patience, collaboration, and the refusal to abandon the vision. Thaao, your journey reminds us that experience is not quiet curiosity. It strengthens us. Every role, every journey, every book, and every encounter can become part of the creative foundation for what comes next. As we close tonight's tea time, I'd like to leave everyone with this thought. What meaningful ideal have you been carrying that may be waiting for you to stop calling it a dream and begin treating it like a project? The distance between an ideal and a realization is often built one determination step at a time. Thaao, thank you for sharing the journey behind the Great Escape and for giving us an honest look at what it takes to move a story towards the screen. Until next time, continue protecting the vision, continue creating boldly, and continue serving real life tea, truth, experience, and awareness, one unforgettable story at a time. And tonight's takeaway from Miss Liz is every film begins as something invisible, an ideal, a feeling, or story living inside its creator. Visions give its direction, collaboration gives it shape, and the perseverance gives it the chance to finally reach the screen. And I'll see everybody tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again. Thank you guys all for joining me on Tea Time.